Hello, KW Compass. It's Greg Fisk here, going to explain to you best practices on filling out the exclusive buyer agency agreement and consent for dual agency. So I'm just going to pull up these two documents and go through some of the verbiage that we use on them in the different paragraphs. These are essentially what we need from a compliance standpoint to turn the keys and show property to our clients. Once they sign this agreement, they become our clients. They go from customer to client. So we're just going to go over some of the terminology that we use to fill in some of these paragraphs on the forms. So we are going to pull up exclusive buyer tenant representation agreement. Again, use the same form for both buyers and tenants. In the first part, date, buyer, broker, all very self-explanatory. Make sure you're putting in as the broker Keller Williams Flagship of Maryland, not Crofton Fort Meade. Buyer, your information, cell phone number, email, address, etc. Buyer authorization. Typically, the buyer seeks the following type of property. We put in here residential. You're going to be working residential properties for your clients. Paragraph 4, this is the termination paragraph. So the agreement shall be effective on said date when you're going to have your client sign that, and shall continue until midnight. I would think at the very least you'd want this to go out at least 6 months. A lot of agents put in there for a year, unless terminated in accordance with the provision of this section. So you're going to have a termination clause in here as well in this box, as required under Section 17-534B5 of the Maryland Real Estate Brokers Act. The parties agree to the following provision for termination of this agreement. Broker to insert terms of termination. Now, myself and my team, we typically put in agency agreement may be terminated by either party within 48 hours given written notice. So this is obviously a very short-term termination agreement. I don't like personally to hold anyone to contracts. A lot of other agents will put in there given written notice within 30 days. Some agents will have any number of things in there, but just make sure you have a termination clause within your contract on paragraph 4, whatever you're comfortable with. I don't like to hold people to contracts. I always tell people, it's easier for them to sign this up front, if they know that they have an out on the contract. And as long as I'm doing my job, I don't usually have anyone opt out of my contract. And I tell people, if you fall out of love with me, I've probably fallen out of love with you. So we want to make sure that it's easy for us to get out of this contract. But again, as long as you're doing your job and you're communicating, communication is key in any relationship, especially in this contractual relationship where we're the fiduciary for our clients. Make sure you're communicating more so than not. Can never communicate enough. And communicate the way your client wants to or expects how you communicate. Set that expectation up front. Do they prefer text messaging, emails, phone calls, whatever it might be? Just make sure you set that expectation up front. Again, for us, agency agreement may be terminated by either party within 48 hours given written notice. You can put in there 30 days, 15 days, 60 days, whatever you're comfortable with. Going down again now, the compensation portion. This is another one that trips some people up. So 7A, compensation to be paid by the buyer in the event of the sale or lease. The compensation to be paid by buyer to broker shall be, we put in per listing agreement, and multiple list service you can put in there as well, or 3% of the sales price. You can put in there 2.5% of the sales price. Typically, you would add whichever is greater. Additionally, there's a transaction coordination fee of $395 due at settlement. So my team charges a transaction fee of $395, and that's a pass-through cost to our transaction coordinator. Everyone within the Compass program, add this clause into your compensation paragraph 7A, and then that will be a pass-through cost to our transaction coordinator here at the office, contracts@flagshipaba.com. So Jennifer Young is our current transaction coordinator. She'll be taking care of the details from contract to close, coordinating the inspections, et cetera, and so forth, bringing all the parties together, making sure that the communication is at a certain standard for your contract. So communicate with her, but this is where you can get compensated from your buyer, again, as pass-through costs to that transaction coordinator. Now you can, as you move forward, you can charge whatever you want in there for an admin fee. And you can have, if you charge $425 and you have that $395 transaction coordinator, then everything above the $395 would be yours to keep as well. So again, per listing agreement, or you put in there 2.5% of the sales price, whichever is greater. That would protect you in case of a FSBO, or for some reason you were looking at a smaller co-oping compensation on the multiple list service. And again, the section, during the term of this agreement or extension thereof, buyer or any person or entity acting on buyer's behalf executes a written agreement to purchase or lease any property through the efforts of anyone, including buyer, and in which event buyer, within 72 hours thereof, shall furnish broker a copy of such written agreement. Or if during the period of 180 days following the expiration of the termination of this agreement, buyer executes a lease or written agreement to purchase any property that the buyer inspected, made inquiry about, or negotiated a purchase or lease during the time of this agreement, or any extension thereof, in which event buyer, within 72 hours thereof, shall furnish broker a copy of such written agreement. So basically, this protects you if you've kind of provided some procuring calls on a property, or if you've shown some property and the buyer terminates the contract and then goes and executes a contract directly with a seller or another agent. So you have 6 months in here that protects you once they terminate this agreement for any properties that you've shown to your buyer. And then also we're compensated here on the lease side of things if they determine that they're going to execute a lease instead of a purchase agreement. The compensation due broker shall be paid as followed. Again, per listing agreement, or 50%, whichever is greater, of first month rent. So that's how that should read. That's how that looks. Make sure you guys are filling out that correctly. Make sure you add that additional transaction coordination fee in there so you're protected. Paragraph 13, you're going to want to always include that consent for dual agency. Remember, we want to make sure that we get that signed ahead of time so that we are able to show the office listings. There's a good chance that you might be out there working with a buyer and you need to show a property that is listed by another agent here at Keller Williams Flagship. So you want to add that consent for dual agency, and we'll take a look at that real quick. Oops. Pull that. So pull up that consent for dual agency form again, and we want to get this signed as well. These would be, again, the two forms necessary from a compliance standpoint as far as taking your clients out and showing properties. There are other forms required by the broker in the office. Communications consent, the RESPA forms, affiliated parties forms. Those are going to need to be in your loop as well. These two particular forms are what we need from a bare minimum as far as showing properties. So the consent for dual agency is a two-part form. The first part, I have read the above information. I understand the terms of dual agency. I understand that I do not have to consent to a dual agency, and that if I refuse to consent, there will not be dual agency, and that I may withdraw the consent at any time upon notice to the dual agent. I hereby consent to have firm name, Keller Williams Flagship of Maryland, act as a dual agent for me as the buyer in the purchase of a property listed for sale with the above reference broker. So again, the broker will act as the dual agent, and then the individual agents are sub-agents of the broker. So there'll be interdependent agents, designated representatives in the transaction. And you can take your buyer shopping with this and that exclusive buyer agency agreement. And then if you guys happen to land on a property that is in fact listed by Keller Williams Flagship of Maryland, you're going to need this second portion of this consent for dual agency. The undersigned buyers hereby affirm consent to dual agency for the following property. You can put the address in there, and they're going to sign off of it. The seller's going to sign off on there as well, and all parties are going to confirm or affirm the fact that everybody's comfortable moving forward in that dual agency situation with Keller Williams Flagship of Maryland and the broker acting as dual agent. So I hope that clarifies things. Make sure you get these documents into your loop Before you take your clients out shopping, you should also have that pre-approval letter from a lender, and you want to include those in your buyer agency folders in .loop and begin getting your paperwork squared away. Any questions, just hit us up at kwcompass@gmail.com. Appreciate you guys and hope everything's going well. I will talk to you later. Take care.